depends how many hours of TV you spent in front of those channels that show nothing. Selling a product called the Sham Wow. The Sham Wow, do you remember it? Right, it's this towel, it's a chamois, and there was this fast-talking guy with spiky hair, and he would talk to you about the wonderful product, the Sham Wow, and then he would go ahead and have 10 pounds of water and put a Sham Wow on it, and it would soak it all up in a single swipe. Remember that guy? And then people would be all around him, and they would stand back and exclaim, wow. Well, I got to tell you that on this particular day, I was dazed out, and then when I saw the video of that Sham Wow working, I have to tell you that I stood up and I exclaimed, wow, where do I get this product? And then, of course, I was told that it's not available in stores. And then this number appeared on the screen and started to flashing, call now, call now. So I went and I called, and I got not one, not two, not three, but 4 Sham Wows for the low price of $19.99. And now don't laugh, because I can tell you, I cleaned all sorts of stuff with my Sham Wow. I cleaned my car, I cleaned and washed the kitchen counter, I did all kinds of stuff. I washed the dog with it. I even used it on my father-in-law. I saw him walking, he had some spittle on his face, and I went ahead and I just went like that with the Sham Wow. And he stood back and went, wow. The things that people will pay for, right? It is a consumer-oriented society, and I think they're taking advantage of us. There are more commercials now of even more products that are even nuttier and less useful. Have you seen the commercials for Meatball Magic? Meatball Magic. You can now press ground beef into identical little balls in 4 easy steps for $11.99. Have you seen the neckline slimmer? It's an exercise. It's an exercise for your chin and to make your neck a little bit slimmer. Next time you see somebody with a nice looking neck, you might think they're doing that exercise, the neckline slimmer. How about Snuggie for dogs? Because every dog wants to look like a monk. And then, of course, there's the cardio jump. The cardio jump is basically a jump rope, but no rope. And for $20.99, all you do is just jump. My favorite one, and this is the marriage blanket. The marriage blanket will save your marriage. It will save your marriage because it is a blanket lined with carbon filters designed to absorb the odors that happen in the middle of the night. So you can be rest assured that you can pass gas at night and your partner won't even sense it. And your marriage will be saved. I am ordering a dozen right now to give them out at my counseling sessions. But the question is, how many of these have been sold? How many people actually buy these things? Well, we buy these things sometimes just to see if it works. I know there are people who, just for the sake of it, just go ahead and buy it just to see what it looks like. In today's passage, Doubting Thomas is that consumer. Doubting Thomas is that smart shopper that goes ahead and says, I'm not going to buy into this unless I test it out, unless I see if it really does work. And it's not until I put my hand on his side. So Doubting Thomas is that smart consumer that's not going to believe just because you ask him to believe. In many ways, we are all the Doubting Thomas. And I will tell you that when I teach Bible study to young and old, I tell people that doubt is healthy, that doubt is a necessary step in our faith, in our development of our faith. We need to go through several stages of doubt at different stages of our lives so that at one point or another we can have the kind of faith that will help change lives. Unlike the products on TV, we really can't order the love of God. We really can't buy the risen Christ. See, the risen Christ is not a product. The risen Christ is a way of life. It's a way of life. Unfortunately, many people approach Christianity as if it were a product. And I see it all the time. I see it with young people. I see it with older people. I see it in my confirmation classes. I see it with those people who are seeking to believe but don't know how to believe. I see it with people who are cynical and step back and are doubting all the way through. And as consumers, they ask consumer-type questions. Will Christianity do something for me? And my answer to them is yes. And then they go, what? And I say, I don't know. All I can tell you is what it did for me. But what it might do for you is completely up to you. There are people who ask me, will being a Christian make me noticeably different? And I say, yes. And they say, how? And I say, well, I don't know. I can tell you how my life has changed. I can tell you how I have changed, but how you change is going to be completely up to you. These two questions are actually very common because they represent the most common traits of humanity. The first one is our selfishness. Out of our selfishness, we want, what is this going to do for me? It is a selfish question. And the selfish person walks into a relationship, walks into any situation wondering, what is this going to do for me? And then the second question is for the insecure and the dissatisfied. How is this going to make me look? How will my friends now see me? How is this going to make me look? Am I going to look like one of those people on TV? Am I going to become somebody that others laugh at? And then the cynical question is, how will I know this Christianity thing is not a scam? That one's easier to answer, I got to tell you the truth. My answer for that one is, it's because I'm here with you. The church will be here with you, and we will walk with you all the way through. In your journey of developing your faith, we will walk alongside you. And that is a commitment that the church makes. We make it at baptism time, and we make it when we receive new members. Next time that we have to read out loud our covenant, take a good look at it. It's a covenant that makes each and every one of us accountable for the faith of the person that is standing up here. That we have to help that individual in their journey, not just leave them all to their own devices. The last question I get, and I get this question very often, is, what if I don't believe the way that you believe? And I'm like, I wouldn't expect you to. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I want you to. Every person's faith is individual. It's personal. And every individual has their own God experience, their own way that they experience the Holy Spirit in their lives. And that experience gives them a different way to interpret, and gives them a way to interpret the message in the Scriptures. It's a very, very important question because we're not here in church to produce replicas of each other. We're not here to make an exact copy of Pastor Keith or Pastor Guillermo or of the saintliest person it's in this pew. Yes, that's you. All right? But we're not here to make replicas. We're not here to have people recite doctrine to the point where they could say it verbatim. And that happens. That has been happening. You come from different walks of life. You might come across a church where week after week they're repeating doctrine in their litany, in their creeds, until somebody could just say them out loud at night and recite it to themselves. And there's something to it. I don't want to bash that. I don't want to put that down. There's something to it. Words have meaning, and meaning creates a new sense of purpose that at one point or another you reflect on what you just said, and it makes you think, and it might make you act. But there's a reason why church here is different week to week. There's a reason why we don't ask you to repeat the same old doctrines week after week. And it's beyond what Pastor Keith wants and beyond what I want. It's a tradition that's much larger than the two of us. It's part of our denominational history. The United Church of Christ was formed specifically to create people who could disagree about the Scriptures, who could disagree about faith while still be in community. That we don't necessarily all have to sign at the bottom line saying, I believe in all these tenets, and that's why I'm here. That you could have your own approach. You could have your own way of looking at it, and that it's going to be okay. I'll never forget that when I was a young pastor back in Miami, I had somebody question me and my faith about the Virgin Mary. And then I went ahead and I said, yeah, I do believe in the Virgin Mary. I don't see why not. And I went ahead and I spoke about the Virgin Mary. And they said, you just believe in the Virgin Mary because you're Cuban. You Cubans can't get away from idolizing the Virgin. And I have to tell you that, we sat there and we talked about it. And in the end, we embraced and we're part of the same church. I didn't kick him out because he doesn't believe in the Virgin Mary, right? And so it's the same thing with Easter. It's the same thing with Easter Sunday. I don't want you to memorize why there's Easter. I don't want you to have a doctrinal view of the risen Christ. What I want you to have is a way of life that exemplifies it. What's more important to me is not so much the details and the words and your belief, but more so how you live it and how you express it day by day. You see, in the same manner that the risen Christ is not a product, the risen Christ has to transcend the paper on which it is written on. It has to be more than just doctrine. It has to become a way of life. And my friends, we are living in perilous times. And if you don't want to admit that, you are living in some sort of shield. Every time I take a look at the news, every time I read about the news, every time that I sit in dialogue with people, there's a certain collective anxiety that's going around, and I think rightly so. So how do we get over this? How do we transcend this anxiety? How do we become the church and the people that help us move through these perilous times into more peaceful times, into more stable times? And I think it all begins with our way of life. We are here in this worship service to take a look and examine ourselves, to consider Christ in our lives, the peace in our hearts, and then when we go out there, we're to become an evangelist of it. In some form or another, we are to spread it. We're to give it to our neighbors, to our friends, to our brothers and sisters, to our co-workers. And we've got to bring down the tension. I could almost hear it. It's like this the static noise that's there behind me, and it's ringing in my ear. And I'm like, how do we bring this down? This is a question that's been nagging me for some time. Now that all my fiction writing is complete and I got nothing else to write about, I go ahead and I start to think about the more philosophical questions, and I started thinking about consciousness. I think the answer to all this resides in consciousness. There are different people with different levels of consciousness, and even though we all share some of the very, very basic consciousness, there's some people that remain at a certain conscious level, and there's some of the people who transcend it. And we've come across enlightened souls in our lives. Some of them are seated in this very pew. People whose faith is so strong and whose life is such an example of the risen Christ that we look at them and we stand back and we go like, wow. How did that woman, how did that man become such a pure soul? And those pure souls are there not out of accident. Those pure souls are not there because they were divinely touched, because somehow or another in their journey of faith, they took this Easter opportunity given to us through the risen Christ to transform their lives and themselves. It reminds me of when I was a starting school teacher. As a school teacher in my first few years, my class was chaos. And there was a bit of creative chaos. It's kind of chaos that I kind of allowed so that the kids could be very creative in their way. I was a bit Montessori in that way, right? But after a while, it started to backfire on me. And I didn't know how to put it together. And one of my teacher friends, who was a mentor, says, you cannot expect for the kids to walk in and already be a source of order and a source of peace. You have to provide that. You have to provide the order and the peace because, first of all, they need it, they want it, and second, because it's a requirement in order for everything else to occur. I held on to that throughout my teaching career, and I hold on to it now as a pastor, because if we want peace in our lives, We can't expect for it to be out there. We can't expect for it to be given to us when we enter into a situation, for it to already be there. We have to provide it. We have to be the instruments and the vessel of that peace. And we have to provide it not only for ourselves, but for others. And in that way, we start bringing down that collective tension that is creating so much anxiety in our lives. But how do we expand our consciousness? Consciousness, first of all, what is that? Let's talk about that word for a second. Well, consciousness happens at the very, very basic levels. We are conscious of our biological needs. When we're hungry, when we're thirsty, when we're tired, when it's hot, when it's cold, we're conscious of this biological need, and we have to take care of it. It's at the survival mode. But our consciousness keeps on expanding as we grow and as we mature. And we see it with our children and grandchildren, how their consciousness expands to then also become aware of the environment and become aware of the space. And then we become aware of other people. Is that person friend or foe? And then we start becoming conscious of other people's needs. It's now just no longer my needs. Now it's the needs of other people. And then the opportunity, the intersection arises with that expanding consciousness to develop compassion and to develop empathy. And it's only through that development that we go ahead and start making a difference in the lives of other people for the sake of making a difference, not because there's something in it for me. And we do it regardless of what we look like, or how other people may consider us. But an expanding consciousness continues to expand until we reach a level of what the Christian mystics have called the Christ consciousness. And the Christ consciousness is a state of mind, it's a state of being, it's a state that transcends everything while still encompassing it all. And when we reach that state of Christ consciousness, we are beyond judgment. We are beyond finger pointing. We are beyond the pettiness of life, and we're no longer talking about the superficialities of our daily living, but talking about matters that are deeper. For some of us, actually for all of us, because it is a universal experience, it happens. All of a sudden in our lives, there's a peak, and we hit it. And we have that moment. The Greeks called it eureka, the aha moment. But a Christ consciousness is beyond the aha, because you see the Spirit. You see what's happening there. So how can we do this in this Easter season? How can we try to find a way to expand our consciousness? Well, there are different ways to experience God. And some of them just happen. And they happen completely by surprise. You cannot plan, and those are the best ones. When we find God in the most unexpected places, next to the most unexpected people. Well, all of a sudden we find God where we would least expect to find God. And we've had plenty of people give testimonies of finding God in a bar, finding God in their home, finding God in the forest, finding God in a variety of different places. So we don't force it. Just have to be open to it. If you're open to experiencing God, then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing God. And you're going to start having this experience with God in the very, very small ways. And you'll begin to encounter God in the smallest of graces of our daily living. And then all of a sudden, you realize that the sand that you're walking on is more than just sand. It's hallowed earth. Because on that sand, a couple expressed their love to each other. On that sand, creativity rose from deep within the earth. A turtle laid its egg there, and life was born. When we're open to experiencing God, we all of a sudden realize, well, wait a second, maybe I should prepare. So that when I see God, I recognize God. Maybe I should read a little more, talk a little more, dialogue a little more. Maybe I should be part of a community a little more. And in this preparation, all of a sudden, when I do come across God, I could recognize it. I could see it. And I could more than just feel it, I could begin to use it. When you expect to encounter God, you recognize the many distractions that are there. And all the distractions keep us from reaching that higher consciousness. At a gathering that I was having last night, we were talking about people who are having drug addictions. And to me, the worst sin of a drug addiction is that it completely creates a block of having a God consciousness or a Christ consciousness, because the addict only sees the drug that he or she needs. Be it the alcohol or be it the cocaine or whatever it might be, the addict only sees the drug, doesn't see anything else. When we want a God experience, we choose adventures. All of a sudden, the safety of our couch, the safety of our home is just not enough. Now we have faith, and now we know that we can go out into the world and we can experience God somewhere else. And we walk with others. A community of faith is very important, because there you realize you're not doing it alone. And then you could ask questions to somebody else. Hey, have you ever experienced this? And in the dialogue, we realize how common this is. And last but not least, to fear not. Fear not. It is the message that is repeated over and over again throughout the Gospels, to fear not. I'm going to take you back to the Gospel reading from the Gospel of John. When Jesus appeared to the disciples and he said, "Peace be with you," I want you to read in between the lines, and I want you to sense the pause. There was this pause. The disciples did not answer right away. They didn't jump up right away. They didn't run to him and embrace him right away. And then he showed them his hands and his side. So in other words, he revealed more of himself to them. And in that revelation, their eyes were open, and then they rejoiced. My friends, I think we're living in that pause. I think right now, we're living in that pause. Easter happened. The tomb was opened. The stone was rolled away. And we are in that pause where the risen Christ is before us. The risen Christ is before us, but we haven't seen the revelation completely. And it might be because of our consciousness. We might be dwelling in things that are keeping us from seeing. It might be because we fear. It might be because we're just so enraged by what's happening in today's world that we can't see beyond it. And that happens at times. Sometimes we get stuck in what the daily news feed gives, so that there's no way that you could see anything beyond it. You can only see what was the last tweet. Or maybe it's because there's just something within us that doesn't let us get there. On this Easter season, I want you to experience the risen Christ. I want you to experience the risen Christ not because it's a biblical fact, but because it is an experience that nobody should be without. Nobody should live a full life without having reached that several times. And to experience the risen Christ means that you come from it transformed. You come from it different. All of a sudden you turn to your neighbors and you realize something new about them. All of a sudden you turn to the mirror and you realize something new about yourself. All of a sudden you turn to your worst enemy, or the brother that has shunned you, or the sister that denounced you, or the boss that wouldn't let you back into the office, or the coworker that cheated you. And you realize that there's more to life than that. You realize that there's more to it than what's happening at that very moment, and that somehow or another it's all connected. And through the risen Christ, we see that Easter door and the interconnectedness of it all. And that we are connected with our brothers and sisters regardless of their race, of their language, of their ethnicity, even of their religion. We're all in it together. Amen.